Welcome back to the show. It seems like from your notes that you've been struggling with sadness and anxiety, and you're really interested in what the Baha'i teachings have to say about detachment. And that's exactly what we're going to deep dive into today.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating concept, and it's definitely relevant to the struggles that you've been going through.
Yeah.
The Baha'i writings have a really interesting perspective on detachment as a way to overcome sadness and anxiety, especially the kind that comes from our relationship to material things.
Okay, so let's get right into it. From what I'm seeing here in your notes, the Baha'i teachings are saying that there's like this link between how attached we are to material things, like possessions and status and all those pleasures, and then also how much sadness and anxiety we feel. But
Yeah.
how does that actually work?
Well, it's not that having stuff is bad or anything. It's more about where we put our focus and how we relate to those things. The Baha'i view is that deep down we're all spiritual beings. And when we get too attached to material things, the stuff that doesn't last, we kind of lose sight of that spiritual part of ourselves. And that can lead to feeling empty and just not at ease.
So it's almost like we're trying to fill a spiritual void with a bunch of stuff, but it doesn't really work.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where this idea of detachment comes in. It's not about rejecting the world or living like you're poor. It's more about changing how we see things and realizing that real happiness and fulfillment come from connecting with that spiritual part of ourselves.
Okay, that makes sense. You keep mentioning connecting with our spiritual nature.
Yeah.
One of the sources that you sent me talks about this idea of justice being the most important thing to Baha'u'llah.
Yeah.
Is there a connection between trying to be just and fair and this detachment from material things?
That's a great question. And yeah, there's a really deep connection. When we're talking about justice here, we're talking about as this big spiritual principle. When we try to be just, we're basically aligning ourselves with that true spiritual nature and focusing on something bigger than our own little wants and needs.
So it's about looking beyond just ourselves and our own desires and realizing that we're all connected.
Exactly. And when we start to cultivate that sense of justice and connection, we kind of naturally start to detach from needing to have so much stuff because we see that real fulfillment comes from contributing to something bigger than ourselves.
Okay, so how do we actually start doing this detachment thing? Is it just a matter of forcing ourselves to not want stuff, or are there things we can do to help us along the way?
Well, it does take some effort, but it's not just about willpower. There are some practical steps we can take. And I think that's where your deep dive can be really helpful for people.
I love giving people actionable advice, so let's dive into those practical steps. But first, can we talk a little more about what detachment actually means? You said it's not about rejecting the world. So how would you describe it?
It's about finding a balance between appreciating the world and all the good things in it, but not letting those things define our worth or happiness. Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, has this really great analogy. He compares our soul to a bird and our body to a cage. When we're super attached to material things, it's like that bird is stuck in the cage. But when we cultivate detachment, it's like we're setting that bird free so it can fly up to heaven.
Okay, I love that image. So it's about freedom.
Exactly. And with that freedom comes this whole new way of seeing things that can really change our well-being for the better.
I'm curious, can you tell us a bit more about those effects? How does detaching actually help us get over our sadness and anxiety?
Well, the Baha'i writings say that detachment helps us heal in three main ways. It frees us from fear, it gives us a clearer sense of purpose, and it helps us find inner peace.
Okay, let's break those down. Getting rid of fear sounds amazing, but what does that actually look like in real life?
Okay, imagine someone who's always worried about money. They're constantly stressed about their finances. That fear can really take over their life. But if they learn to detach, they'll start to understand that their true worth and security don't depend on how much money they have. They can trust that even if their financial situation changes, they have the strength and resilience inside them to handle it.
So we're talking about shifting our sense of security from outside stuff to something inside ourselves. That's a powerful idea.
Exactly. And when we're not ruled by fear anymore, it's easier to make choices that are in line with our higher purpose. And that brings us to the second benefit, a clearer sense of purpose.
So how does detachment help us find our purpose?
Imagine someone who feels lost and doesn't know what they should be doing with their life. They might jump from one thing to the next, always chasing after success and recognition, but never feeling fulfilled. But as they practice detachment, they start to see that their real purpose is about their spiritual growth and making the world a better place.
Interesting. So our actions should be less about what we want and more about a bigger purpose.
Yeah, exactly. And when our actions match up with that purpose, we get to that third benefit, which is the best one. Inner peace.
Inner peace. I think we all want a bit of that. But how does letting go of things bring us that peace?
Think about someone who's always comparing themselves to others, always jealous of what other people have or what they've achieved. That constant comparison can be a huge source of anxiety and unhappiness. But when they learn to detach, they realize that true happiness comes from within. It's about being content and grateful for what they have right now, no matter what's happening around them.
So detachment helps us stop needing validation from other people and comparing ourselves to them all the time.
Exactly. And that's what makes the Baha'i teaching so powerful. They offer a way to deal with all the anxiety of the world we live in today. It's about realizing that our true worth isn't about what we own, but about who we are at our core.
This is all making a lot of sense to me. But it also seems like a pretty big change. How do we even begin to make this shift? Where do we start?
Luckily, the Baha'i writings give us some really practical advice on how to live with more detachment every day. And that's what I'm excited to share with you next.
I think everyone listening is excited to hear about those practical steps. So let's get into them in part 2 of this deep dive.
Okay, so we've been talking about all the great stuff that comes with detachment, like not being so afraid, having a clear idea of what we're supposed to be doing with our lives, and finding that inner peace everyone's always looking for. But now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. How do we actually do this? How do we cultivate detachment?
That's the real question, isn't it? It's easy to talk about it, but actually putting it into practice in our daily lives is like a whole different story. What do the Baha'i writings tell us about that?
Well, I actually give us a bunch of practical things we can do. Each one is kind of like a tool that helps us see things in a new way and loosen the grip that material things have on us.
Okay, I'm ready. Tell me all about them.
All right, so the first one is daily reflection. Basically, we should try to take some time every day to think about how this material world is temporary. It doesn't last forever. But our souls, they're eternal.
So it's like a reality check, reminding ourselves that all this stuff we worry about isn't really the most important thing in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly. It's about shifting our focus away from what's fleeting and towards what's everlasting. When we remember that there's a bigger picture, our worries about stuff start to seem smaller.
I can definitely see how that would help. It's all about perspective. What's the next step?
Prayer and meditation are also really important. Taking time to connect with the divine, with God, helps us tap into this source of strength and wisdom that's bigger than the material world.
So it's not just about understanding it intellectually, but also about cultivating a spiritual connection.
Exactly. When we pray and meditate, we align ourselves with something way bigger than ourselves, and that gives us comfort and guidance when things are tough.
It's like finding a source of peace and strength inside of ourselves.
You got it. And that inner strength helps us let go of the need for validation and security from the outside world, which leads us nicely to the next step, serving others.
Service. I've heard that's a big one in a lot of spiritual traditions. How does that fit in with detachment?
Well, when we focus on helping other people, our attention naturally moves away from our own little selfish desires and all the stuff we think we need. We start to feel this sense of purpose and fulfillment that comes from contributing to something good.
So it's like expanding our circle of concern to include other people's well-being too.
Yeah. And that shift in focus helps weaken the hold that material things have on us. The Baha'i writings actually say that true happiness comes from forgetting about ourselves completely and just focusing on the needs of others.
That's a really interesting idea. It actually makes me think of the next step you mentioned. Gratitude. But how does being grateful connect to detachment? Wouldn't being grateful for all the stuff we have actually make us more attached to it?
That's a great question. The key is in how we practice gratitude. It's not about holding on to our possessions really tightly and feeling like they define us, but more about appreciating all good things in our lives and seeing them as gifts.
So it's about recognizing the abundance we already have and not always wanting more.
Exactly. And when we feel content, it helps us loosen the grip of material desire. When we're truly grateful, we can enjoy the world and everything in it without needing to own it all.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all comes together. So far, we've got daily reflection, prayer and meditation, service to others, and gratitude. What's the final step on this path to detachment?
The last one is about keeping it simple, living a simple life. I know they can be hard in today's world where everyone's trying to sell us something, but it's really important for detachment.
Yeah, I can see how that's a tough one. We're constantly bombarded with messages telling us to buy more stuff. But how does simplicity actually help us detach?
Well, when we simplify our lives, we're making a conscious choice to step back from that constant chase for material things. We start to put our energy into things that actually matter. Our relationships, how we contribute to society, and growing spiritually.
It sounds like it's about making sure our actions are aligned with our values.
Absolutely. And when we do that, we free ourselves from the burden of having too much stuff and all the stress that comes with trying to keep up with everyone else.
It's like decluttering our homes, our minds, and our hearts. And that's where real freedom comes from.
Yes. All 5 of these steps work together to help us see things in a new way, to be content with what we have, and to finally find that detachment that frees us from the anxiety of the material world.
It's like a toolbox for dealing with the craziness of modern life. And I love how these steps aren't just about us changing ourselves, but also about making the world a better place. One of the sources you sent me mentioned that detachment can help create a more just and equitable society. Can you tell us more about that?
That's such an interesting idea. It makes sense, though. Like when we're so busy chasing after stuff, it's easy to forget about other people and making the world a fairer place for everyone.
Right. Think about it, if we're not so attached to things, we're less likely to hoard resources or take advantage of others or just ignore injustice when we see it.
So you're saying detachment can actually be like this driving force for social change?
Absolutely. When we prioritize spiritual values over material wealth, our actions start to reflect that. We're more likely to want to share what we have and speak up for people who are being marginalized and just work towards a world where everybody has a chance to thrive.
It's like this ripple effect. As more people embrace this idea of detachment, it creates a wave of positive change that can actually transform society. Exactly. Imagine a world where people are less focused on getting stuff for themselves and more focused on what they can give to others. A world where cooperation and compassion are at the heart of everything we do.
That's a beautiful vision. And it all starts with each of us changing ourselves.
That's the key. The Baha'i writings really emphasize that real social change starts within each person's heart. As we cultivate detachment in our own lives, we become the change makers.
So it's not just about finding our own peace, but also about making the world a more peaceful and just place for everyone.
Exactly. And the cool thing is those two things go hand in hand. As we work for social justice, we actually deepen our own sense of purpose and fulfillment.
It creates this amazing cycle. Detachment leads to social action, and then that action reinforces our detachment and makes us even more committed to making the world a better place.
Precisely. And it all starts with that willingness to change how we see things, to challenge the idea that happiness equals owning a lot of stuff, and to embrace a way of life that puts spiritual values first.
This deep dive has been so insightful. As we wrap up, is there one main thing you hope people listening will take away from this?
I really hope people understand that detachment isn't about depriving yourself or not letting yourself enjoy things. It's about freedom. Freedom from all the worry and pressure of the material world. It's about connecting with who we really are spiritually and finding a deeper, more lasting happiness and fulfillment.
So it's not about having less, it's about being more present, more connected, more in tune with our purpose.
Yes, and I'll leave you with this one last thought. Think about what would happen if you shifted your focus from what you're missing to what you can give to others. What can you offer to people without expecting anything back? It could be a smile, a listening ear, a helping hand. These small acts of generosity can make a huge difference, both for the person receiving them and for your own well-being.
What a beautiful message. Shifting our focus from lack to abundance, from worrying about ourselves to helping others. It's a challenge worth taking on, and it can lead to a life that's full of meaning, purpose, and peace. So to everyone listening, as you go about your day, I encourage you to think about the ideas we've discussed and how you can apply them to your own life. What small steps can you take to cultivate detachment, to free yourself from fear and anxiety, and to make the world a more just and compassionate place? The journey begins with you. And remember, you don't have to do it alone. There's a whole community of people out there who are on the same path, walking alongside you every step of the way.